today you're going to kick it off by starting out talking about a guy that I've been high on for quite some time, but why don't you go ahead and get to it?
Yeah, you've been talking about him for a while, so let's talk about him again. Courtland Sutton, currently wide receiver 22 on the season, averaging 11.2 points per game. The wide receiver 1 for Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. This past weekend against the Baltimore Ravens, he had 7 catches for 122 yards for a total of 36 catches, 499 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the season. In the last 2 games against the Ravens and the Panthers, he's had a total of 15 receptions for 222 yards. Are we buying in on Bo Nix's wide receiver 1, Mike? We got these prices here. Christian Kirk. You got one guy who's injured for the rest of the season, and you got Courtland Sutton, who's got back-to-back 100-yard games.
But it's a collarbone injury. How old is Courtland Sutton? Do you know?
I believe he's 28 or 29.
So that's not a death sentence. He's not going to be taken out to pasture. He's 29. Give me the Courtland Sutton side. I think he's got a good rapport there. He wasn't moved at the trade deadline, so the Denver Broncos are committed. He's another guy who's been somewhat quarterback proof throughout his career. He's never really had super solid quarterback play. Give me Courtland Sutton there. Especially when you consider, I do think the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to have a head coaching change, and I think there's going to be other changes this offseason. I don't anticipate that with the Broncos, so a little bit more stability in that situation there. These are things that you should also consider when you trade for players.
Absolutely, especially with a guy like Christian Kirk, who are already looking towards next season.
Yeah.
All right, Courtland Sutton, not expensive. How about 2/3, Mike?
Oh, yeah, here, take him.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and how about a 2nd-round pick for Sutton and a 3rd-round pick?
Yeah, I like that. That's essentially like the 2/3 trade.
Yeah, I think Courtland Sutton right now is a very accessible buy if you need a wide receiver for your wide receiver depth, or even just someone to put into your flex spot. You can't do much worse than Courtland Sutton in your flex spot right now.
I agree. And, the NFL's trade deadline is come and gone, but your trade deadline is likely still open. So go ahead and make that move right now. Let's talk about another wide receiver, Nate. Let's talk about Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver Quentin Johnston. A lot of people really down on him coming into the league and after last season. He's been a little spotty this year, but let's talk about it because this Chargers passing game is starting to open up, whether we want it to or not. He had 4 catches for 118 yards and a touchdown in a 27-10 win versus Cleveland. And by the way, that was his first career 100-yard game. Congratulations, Quentin. His next closest was 91 yards, and that was December 10th, 2023 versus Denver. He had 3 for 91 and no touchdowns. He's wide receiver 62 on the season and averaging 11.8 fantasy points per game. So let's talk about what it costs to get him. Here's a trade that I saw. Geno Smith for Cedric Tillman and Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, give me Geno. Give me Geno unless I really need wide receiver. But even in that case, I'm probably going elsewhere with my Geno than trying to get Tillman / Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, I think if I have Geno Smith, I'm going to look for a more consistent starter. 2 teams going in different directions here in this trade. Daniel Jones. Straight up.
Just Daniel. Give me, what? Daniel Jones was a top 5 quarterback this past week. Give me Daniel Jones.
All right.
I got to start somebody in my super flex spot in this one league where I only have 1 quarterback. Daniel Jones is my guy.
You do know that there are times where positional players can score more than quarterbacks, right?
Mike, did you not just hear me? Daniel Jones looking good last week. I don't know about the weeks before that. Probably not too great, but Daniel Jones in this last game had 24.4 fantasy points. Now, in the 2 games before that, he combined for 13.7. But this past game, 24.4 at least.
I will say this. If I have an opportunity to trade for George Kittle and put him in my super flex spot the rest of the year over Daniel Jones, I would do that.
I think that's probably a smart idea.
I got one more. Devontae Adams for Quentin Johnston in a 25-second.
I think that the most valuable part of this entire trade is a 2nd-round pick. So give me the 2nd and Quentin Johnston.
All right, fair enough. Nate, we have another wide receiver to talk about here.
We do. He just lost the biggest competition that he had on his team when the Panthers traded away Deontay Johnson. So now we're looking at Xavier Legette, wide receiver 53 on the season, averaging 8.5 points per game. I believe wide receiver 54 is Xavier Worthy. So just putting that out there. Xavier Legette, 1 spot ahead of Xavier Worthy. 4 catches for 33 yards and a touchdown last week against the Saints. That puts him at 26 catches, 244 yards, and 4 touchdowns on the season. Led the team this past week with 6 targets. Xavier Legette, how accessible is he? You can make a straight-up trade for Dalton Schultz, J.K. Dobbins for Xavier Legette. Either one of those guys sound good to you?
I want to hang on to J.K. Dobbins if I'm contending. He's been a little inconsistent lately, but this past week he did have a good game. Dalton Schultz has really disappointed me.
Yeah.
But if I'm rebuilding, I'll move either of those guys for Xavier Legette.
All right. A little package here. We got Aldrick Estime and Wandale Robinson for Xavier Legette.
So Sean Payton did say that we expect to see more Aldrick Estime going forward, but we don't really know what that looks like. And the Giants offense as a whole, even though their quarterback was quarterback 5 this last weekend, it's still been very inconsistent. Sorry, Nate, I had to jab you there. Give me Xavier Legette over those two.
That sounds good. I agree there. And then as I did find this one, Mike, I want to throw it on there, get our thoughts. DK Metcalf for Xavier Legette in a first-round pick.
I want DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is a fantastic fantasy wide receiver. He's out this past week, but when he's on the field, he definitely has Geno Smith's attention. And no matter who would be the quarterback for Seattle, they know that DK's that dude. So give me DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I find this a very interesting trade because Xavier Legette kind of projects to be, if he hits a ceiling, his ceiling is probably DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
Now, if he hits it, sure, this trade looks great if you pick up Legette in the first-round pick, but I'm going to go with the proven talent that we already have on an offense that's better than the Carolina Panthers offense, especially moving forward. Give me DK Metcalf here.
It's funny because you say his ceiling could be DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf's ceiling is DK Metcalf, and he's already doing it, so we'll just go with him.
This is an interesting trade here where if I had DK Metcalf, I would seriously consider trading him for Legette in a first if I had DK. And I was rebuilding, I would probably make that trade. But also, I would also be into, getting DK Metcalf for Legette in a first. So I could go either way depending on your team build, but I do like the DK side here.
Nate, what are we doing with New Orleans Saints wide receiver Chris Olave? Dennis Allen's not doing anything with him anymore, I can tell you that. He did leave the game against Carolina with a concussion. I think I could speak for most of the fantasy community by saying we haven't seen exactly what we wanted from him to this point in his career overall. We've seen some flashes. I don't know if it's his situation, if it's the quarterback play he's had, or if it's just him, but we haven't seen what we really wanted. Is he a good sell or a good buy low for next year for a middle of the pack team? Are we looking towards next year already with Chris Olave? He had 1 catch for 13 yards against Carolina, 32 receptions, 400 yards, and a touchdown. He's wide receiver 52 on the season with 9.6 fantasy points per game. That's almost Josh Palmer-esque. What does it cost to get Chris Olave? That's the question. Nate, these are trades that happened. George Kittle.
Man, I think this is a tale of two teams. If you're rebuilding, I want Chris Olave. If I'm contending, I want George Kittle. Absolutely.
Yeah. If I'm rebuilding, I want George Kittle. If I'm contending, I want George Kittle. I think if I'm rebuilding, I can move him for somebody more consistent than Chris Olave. 225 seconds.
Yeah, give me Chris Olave for 225 seconds.
Yeah, same. There's a potential that those second-round picks could turn into something better, but they could also both bust out, and we've seen that before. And here's another little package deal. Sam Darnold and DeAndre Swift. It's a little bit tougher. Sam Darnold's been playing some good football.
Yeah, and DeAndre Swift has been good in the past month as well.
Yes.
I think this is also kind of a tale of two teams. I think Chris Olave at this point, with how the Saints are headed the rest of the season, with the injuries that he has sustained, he's probably not a piece on a contending team.
Right.
But Sam Darnold, DeAndre Swift absolutely are. So this seems like a trade of two different teams. I like it for both sides.
I don't know if I want either of this whole trade. I think it's a good discussion point. I think it's fair. But we're talking about uncertain futures. Chris Olave, there's going to be a new coaching staff coming in. Sam Darnold, I don't think he's the Vikings starting quarterback next year. Don't forget, they drafted J.J. McCarthy. He's on IR. And DeAndre Swift, look, running backs, even if they have a good year, their shelf life is short.
You never
You
know.
never really know.
Yeah.
So, all right, this is probably one of the most Nate players in this episode. Nate, who do you have for us next?
I believe we talked about him recently, but I had to bring him up again because he had a pretty good week. Jakobi Meyers, wide receiver for the Raiders, wide receiver 26 in the season, averaging 13.8 points per game. Team leading 11 targets this past week for 8 catches and 105 yards. Against the Bengals, The Raiders wide receiver 3 was Ramel Keaton.
Who?
Exactly, Mike. Exactly. I don't even know who that is. But on the season, Jakobi Meyers, 39 catches, 430 yards, and 2 touchdowns. This is a guy that consistently brings up fantasy points. Wide receiver 26 on the season with no target competition outside of Brock Bowers at the tight end position. So, value-wise, we're looking at Kareem Hunt, straight up. Positional need.
Right? Yeah. I mean, Kareem Hunt's leading the charge for the Chiefs right now, playing pretty well.
Yeah, it's been.
So, pick your poison there.
All right. And then how about a second-round pick for Myers and a third?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then another one straight up here, wide receiver for wide receiver, Cedric Tillman for Jakobi Meyers.
This is tough, to be honest with you. And I didn't think it would be with Amari Cooper moving on. Cedric Tillman's gotten some decent playing time and he's looked pretty good. So I'd say, the thing is, neither of these guys have really good quarterback situations going forward, as in they're both very questionable. So in this case, I think it's fair. Pick which wide receiver you like best.
All right. I'm going to pick Jakobi Meyers then because I know what I'm getting with him. I don't know quite yet on a large sample scale what I'm getting with Cedric Tillman. So
that's fair enough. We got one more player to talk about. Hey, it's another wide receiver, and that is Seattle Seahawks wide receiver Jaxon Smith-Njigba. This is what we have been waiting for. Is it sustainable? 7 catches, 180 yards, and 2 touchdowns without DK Metcalf. Hey, guess what? Tyler Lockett's still viable as well. He could still play. 3 catches, 63 yards, and a touchdown. Let's not forget Tyler Lockett still under contract through 2025. JSN, wide receiver 14 on the season. He's averaging 14.0 fantasy points per game. Quite respectable if that is in your flex spot or as your wide receiver 3. But the important thing is, Nate, what does it cost to get JSN? He was not an expensive guy to acquire when he was drafted or even up until now. Let's see if it's still ringing true. 25 first-round pick.
Yep. I'm happy to make that trade.
Yeah. And what do you think about him compared to some of the wide receivers in this class? Would you rather have JSN or Tet McMillan?
I'd probably rather have Tet McMillan, but the list probably ends after that.
Luther Burden?
I don't know if I would take Luther Burden over JSN. Luther Burden has not been playing as well this year. Might be a Missouri thing rather than just a Burden thing.
I think so.
But he has not been playing that well. Maybe Travis Hunter over JSN, but I need to see what's going with Travis Hunter. Is he going to be playing wide receiver full-time, cornerback? There's a lot of question marks there right now.
JSN, or as we talked about him before, Chris Olave.
At this point, Mike, I think I might pick JSN. I think I'm going to go with JSN here. He's the guy, doesn't have the injuries at the moment, is performing on a better offense. I like that going forward.
JSN and a 25 first for Jalen Hurts.
I think in this situation, I'm going to have to go away from JSN, go after the quarterback, Jalen Hurts. The offensive situation they have around him right now is incredible. Between Barkley, Brown, Smith, they're all there for many more years. They're all been locked down to contract extension. So
yeah,
give me Jalen Hurts. I think this is a pretty easy trade as much as I like JSN.